Hello there. This build is dealing with a bit of a rarity. We're going to have a look at the Martin T4M float plane produced in 70-second scale by Plusmodel. Produced by the Glenn L. Martin Company, the prototype XT4M first flew in 1927 and 102 production aircraft were ordered for the US Navy. Designated the T4M1, they entered service in August 1928. The type served as the standard torpedo bomber aboard the aircraft carriers of the US Navy through much of the 1930s until replaced by the far more advanced and better known TBD-1 Devastator. The great majority of T4Ms were completed with a wheeled undercarriage, but some were fitted with floats as represented in the kit here. Plusmodel was founded in 1990 in the Czech Republic and specialised in resin accessories, generally in 35th scale. Recently though, it started to offer complete kits, and the Martin T4M represents its first effort at a 1/72nd scale aircraft. Opening the box, we see two main medium grey runners with a total of over 90 parts and a small clear runner with a further 11 items. In addition, there's a small pack of 29 resin parts used to construct the engine. Whilst the total number of parts may appear impressive, the quality of moulding, frankly, was much less so. Flash, prominent mould seams as well were evident on many parts, and the surface detailing was soft and generally unconvincing. The prominent circular fuselage windows were provided on the transparent runner, but are very thick bullseye mouldings that are never really going to be usable. It quickly became apparent that this was going to be a work-intensive project. On a more positive note, the decal sheet was very nicely presented, and later on in the build, when the decals were used, they performed very well. I was also able to get hold of some etched brass accessories, a small but useful set from Brengun, they would prove their worth as well. The superfine aero black rigging here, although it's in the picture, I intended to use it but in the end didn't on this particular project, but no doubt its time will come. The engine was built first. It proved a bit difficult because the fit of the individual cylinders into the circular block was poor, and trimming to fit them meant continually checking their overall alignment. The fitting of the 9 individual fuel inlet pipes was similarly tricky, but worst of all were the exhaust pipes, which took a lot of trimming and fettling to get right. On the plus side, once finally completed and painted, the finished unit did look pretty good. You can see on screen the colours that I used. The propeller itself needed a lot of cleaning up, but it also looked okay in the end, and the decals for the tip markings went on very well. Cockpit interior was done next. It's a good idea to begin by removing the locating pins from the starboard fuselage half, as they hinder rather than help fuselage alignment later on. Make sure each half is sanded flat, and take care to ensure the louvres on the forward upper fuselage align with no gap present at all, as it's very difficult to fill and sand around such delicate items. Also, fit the lower wing in place under each fuselage half. It's easier to clamp the part to get a really secure joint now, rather than wait until the fuselage halves have been joined. The wing also provides a convenient sort of handle on each fuselage half when adding the interior parts later on. There were 3 separate floor sections and a dozen or so delicate parts representing the internal tubular framework of the real thing. The floor sections were fitted first and caused no problems. However, the spindly sections representing the tubing are not very cleanly moulded and have thick attachment points to the runner. It would have been quicker and probably given better results if the whole lot had been replaced with fine plastic rod basically. Anyway, the seats were reasonable, and the separate cushions were actually the best moulded parts in the entire kit. The control wheels and instrument panel were fairly crude, but fortunately the Brengun set has replacements for these items, as well as nicely represented seat belts. The circular transparencies, don't use them, they need replacing, and that can be done later on. The colours I've used, we've put on the screen in front of you. Assembling the fuselage half presents some more issues. Although the sanding mentioned earlier meant there were no gaps, the alignment of the two halves was a problem. It wasn't too bad on the top, but was poor underneath, as the photo shows. Much filling and sanding was required to cure this. Then there was the transparent observation panel to be fitted under the front of the nose. The kit part is accurately shaped and quite well moulded. Unfortunately, the opening into which it fits is too small and the wrong shape. A lot more work was required to cure this, including the use of a Dremel to enlarge the hole, necessary because the plastic is so thick in this area. Now we have the wing struts. None of the struts provided in the kit were particularly well moulded, with prominent seam lines and some flash very evident. The locating pegs on the ends were poorly formed too. All of the struts are over scale and some, such as those for the tailplane, totally inaccurate. Also, the locating holes in the wing and fuselage were either poorly formed or non-existent. Other than that, there were no problems at all. The outermost struts on each wing are usable once they've been cleaned up, but the aileron actuator struts hopelessly oversized and they need replacing, in this case with aerofoil sectioned rod. The struts need adding one at a time with constant checking for alignment. The inboard struts are also inaccurate. These are actually more of a bar than a strut, and they were replaced with length of 0.45mm brass rod from Albion Alloys. 6 of the 8 inner wing fuselage struts were replaced, although the forward upper pair did prove usable. If the outer wing struts are done first, the upper wing can be temporarily taped in place to help with the positioning alignment of the others. It took a long time. The floats didn't look like they'd be easy to fit, so I thought it would be a good idea to have them in place before the main paint job and the attachment of the upper wing. Floats themselves are assembled first. The alignment of each half wasn't bad, but some small gaps needed filling before attention turned to the struts. These are overscale and not particularly well moulded, but as the floats take the weight of the completed model, I thought it was inadvisable to thin them down too far, as it would reduce their strength. In the end, there was a bit of a compromise. The main V struts from the kit were used after being cleaned up, but the outer reinforcing struts were replaced with finer aerofoil section strip. The accurate fitting of the floats was undoubtedly the most demanding part of the entire build, because so many things have to be lined up with each other, and the locating points are only vaguely represented. It was found best to fit the struts to the wing underside first. Each one was added individually, lined up and allowed to dry before the next one was positioned. Another long job, but the completed assembly was surprisingly robust. It was now time for painting and adding the decals. The fuselage was primed, and after a light rubbing down with a mildly abrasive cloth, the top coat could be applied. The real aircraft was mostly covered with fabric that was treated with a silver cellulose dope. This gave a light grey rather than a polished metal appearance. The best way of simulating this is the mix I've put up on screen for you. It was applied in several thin coats and gave satisfactory results. Red areas were applied next. An advantage of Alclad is that it can be reliably masked without lifting. Certainly the case here. The red fuselage band and tailplane areas were masked and sprayed with no problem. The nose area on the real thing was covered with a series of metal panels. These were not polished but painted with a protective coat of light grey. The SMS paint here, indicated on the screen, did the job well. Top wing was assembled and painted separately. The wing itself is quite well produced, nice and thin with reasonably sharp trailing edges. On the other hand, the pipe to the fuel tank on the upper surface of the wing is crudely represented and really needs to be sanded off and replaced with a length of fine plastic rod. The wing fold lines have not been represented, and these need to be scribed on both upper and lower surfaces of both upper and lower wings. Ailerons are separate items, but they do need careful trimming to get a satisfactory fit. After priming, the silver underside was painted next, and then the distinctive yellow wing on the upper surface. When it came to markings, the red chevrons provided as a decal, but to ensure the correct colour match, it was painted on instead. The kit decals for the national marking and the ID letter were good and responded well to the Microsol microset solutions used with them. Now to attach the upper wing. The model was inverted and the outer main plane struts were glued first with strips of tape to ensure the correct alignment. Superglue was used together with an accelerator to ensure a rapid firm joint. Then the interplane struts are glued. They only butt joint to the upper wing, so again CA glue was used. The point of join is difficult to access, so a little trick was used. Some short strips of very thin plastic card were cut that slid easily between the top of the strut and the wing to which it was being attached. A dab of CA glue was applied to the surface of one end of the strip. This was then slid under the strut area and drawn forward so the glue is pulled through the join, then set quickly with accelerator. This worked very well. Don't try it with paper strips though. The glue can permeate through these and may end up sticking to the model before they can be drawn through the joint. Time spent aligning the struts earlier on really paid off at this point, as the wing was firmly and correctly attached with no extra fettling required. Now it was time for every modeller's favourite job, namely the rigging. There was a lot to do, even though I simplified it a bit in some areas. I used the tried and tested stretched sprue option. The job is made a bit more difficult by the lack of accessibility to some areas, but perseverance paid off in the end. Dividers were used to ascertain length, CA glue and accelerator for fixing. A handy stress ball is also useful. Finishing off jobs included fitting the remaining 2 windscreens and the Lewis guns on the scarf ring. The ring is offered as a replacement on the Bren gun set and is a vast improvement over the kit item. The guns provided in the kit, well, let's not say too much about them. Let's talk more about the 3D printed replacements from Scale Fiend Miniatures, which were excellent and really enhanced the appearance of the finished model. The pre-assembled engine was then fitted, a couple of tiny PE handholds on the port side of the fuselage, and the model was complete. The finished model is surprisingly large and looks quite impressive, but you will have gathered that it was not an easy build. This is partly due to the nature of the subject aircraft, but also, I'm afraid, to the shortcomings of the kit, which added very considerably to the workload. Despite, or maybe because of all this, it was actually an enjoyable project. Overcoming challenges is what serious modelling is all about, and the feeling at the end was that the effort and frustrations had been well worthwhile. Just as well really, as this kit will very likely remain the only show in town as far as a representation of this aircraft is concerned. So there we have it, another project completed. I hope you found this presentation interesting and informative, and that you'll be joining me again in the future. Thanks very much for watching, and goodbye.